We're at Ricky's place, and this is video 3, casual chats, leading up to a more formal, a classroom sort of situation in which we discuss subjects in dealing with the healing of childhood trauma. And in my particular case, my expertise is in having been raised by a narcissistic mother. Ricky says hello. Yeah. And I did write a haiku. I didn't do the homework assignment, but those are going to be in the more formal ones where we actually have discussions and things. I'm just doing the brainstorming sessions now. So this is brainstorming session video 3, and welcome. And I'm going to keep this one very informal because there was a lot of material we covered, actually. Because the success and failure, when you take a look at all your successes, you may have noticed that you might have spent more time in your mind thinking about your failures. Well, with regards to relationships, myself having picked narcissistic partners, I have a really good exercise now for how to do the reality check of, yes, they were really that terrible. Because your mind fools you, and that's where we overlap into perception and trauma response and trauma amnesia and things like that are all phenomena that are for real. And so when people give themselves a hard time or they can't believe that their loved one is sticking it out for so long, that person really is needing to do it for themselves. It's for them to do it for themselves. And it's really hard to watch a person go down. And I know I had some friends, some really good friends, that shared that with me after the fact, when I finally got away from that bad daddy in Virginia. The videos in which I used to make it, I would refer to him as my guy. So I was definitely deluded, and I also had a fantasy I had built around us. And he was one hunk of a man, and he did give me great amounts of oxytocin, great amounts of pleasure. But the bad part started magnifying more and more, and the sweetness diminished and went further and further away from my daily experience. And when I moved in, the minute I moved in, it was awful. But trauma bonds, and I kept going back because it is a drug. And they say that the child of a narcissistic mother, maybe in your case it was your guy and it was your dad, but from my experience, I read up on this and discovered it to be amazing once I found it to be actually be really quite true in regards to myself, if I do say so myself, in humbleness, that once you get over the narcissistic abuse, you get away. In other words, you say no. You find the source, you find the cause. No, what's for me, knowing that the trauma bond was my mother. And then remembering that my father used to whip my ass upon her request when we did something wrong, like break something because we were kids and we're in New Hampshire and we were in the winter time. We could go outside, and sometimes you couldn't always be outside. You didn't spend your life outside. And you didn't roughhouse only outside. You're a kid. You roughhoused everywhere you went, right? So we got punished for breaking something. And you kids were always, being blamed for breaking things. And I remember being sort of offended. It's like, but we're children. We're growing. We're learning how to operate our bodies. What do you mean, you kids? So my father didn't have the ability to separate the individuals from the kid group. I wish he did. He had disconnected with fathering. It was his generation, born in 1930. I think his mother was dominated by a man, so I think my father probably was the child of a narcissistic father. Because my grandmother on my father's side was as good as gold, but she died early. And there you have it. But then my father, of course, is narc bait. And he's attracted to this fiery woman. He's attracted to a woman who could stand up for herself the way his mother never did to his father. Perhaps. You know, I'm a storyteller, so this is my story I'm imagining right now. But in my case, I did not want to be the bitch like my mother because she ball busted my father and I didn't like the way she yelled at him. But when I grew up and started healing, I also became angry with him for not standing up for himself. I became angry with him for not standing up for his kids. Yeah, you go through a lot of that. Those emotions are important to have and recognize and allow. And if you were a child of a narcissistic mother, the only emotion you were allowed to have was happiness. They were the only ones allowed to be angry. You weren't allowed to complain. So you got taught real young that something was wrong with you if you had an opinion or if you had preferences. And so I don't know about you, but in my life, that made it harder for me to assert myself. And then there's the will and willpower and how a narcissistic mother breaks the will of her children. And we're going to work on the will as well. And let the trumpets sound. The angel trumpets. Yes, there are will, center, and solar plexus enhancing exercises one can do in the simple space of their own living room or comfortable zone and with their own imaginations and bodies. That's essential. You have to have a body to do this. And I don't do a transcendental meditation. Everything I do is about being connected to the body because we have disassociated. So many of us, especially if we went out into the dating world and had either actual sexual encounters or just sexually hungry men sort of like lusting after you. It was just sort of turned you off because, you know, I'm coming from that was all it was. That's all he wanted was sex. And then I realized that all of my partners wanted something from me, but who I really was. And so that's when I realized that's how I was raised. That it didn't matter what was inside of me. It was what I could do for my mother. It's what I can do for my partners. And so going back on the dating apps or seeing the sexiest 60-year-old they've ever seen, and they're all thinking, she can give me sex. And that's what they wanted right away. And so I do not want to have a quivering old man with a limp DICK attempting to prove he's got testosterone still. Like he did when he was 50-something. I mean, things change when you're 60-something, man. I tell you. I noticed that with my ex, actually. I noticed that with myself as well. And it doesn't have to be that way if you go through the processes I went through. I'm not guaranteeing anything, but I'm telling you, I'm feeling younger and more weightless and light by doing some of the grieving work. I woke up and I did some grieving work, meaning I yelled and told my mother I hated her for what she did and said what and